Welcome, everyone. My name is Michael S. Siever. You're listening to Equal Chance to Be Unequal, my podcast about unlocking human potential through helping people disconnected from their purpose uncover and live their purpose.
Now, I'd like to introduce you to Michael Siever, executive coach and contributor to Forbes magazine. Michael S. Siever is an executive coach with expertise in executive leadership, personal branding, change management, organizational effectiveness, and employee engagement. He is a certified professional 12 driving forces analyst, a certified professional behavioral analyst, and a Thunderbird School of Global Management MBA. Michael is a contributor to Forbes, serves on the Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Central Arizona Board of Directors, and was a member of the Valley Leadership Institute's Class 38. There we go. All right, I like that. And was named to the Phoenix Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Class of 2016. Please give a warm welcome to Michael.
So guys, I feel woefully traditionally underdressed, especially considering that this table is wearing jackets that have hearts on them. I mean, they look fantastic. And there's some noisemakers, there's wigs, there's all these things. You guys are awesome. There are actually people coming over to Peter, who's at table 8, and somebody just offered him his Rolex watch in exchange for the Spirit Award. There are things that are happening. And so it's very, very interesting to kind of watch it. So Peter's chuckling because he knows it's true. So, okay, to get us started, I'm going to ask you just a couple of quick questions. Who here, make as much noise as you possibly can, who here has heard the phrase, the pain to purpose journey? Okay, so a little bit more than I was expecting. That's good, okay? Second question, who here has watched the movie The Matrix? Okay, a little bit bigger, which is good. Okay, third question, who here is alive? Okay. All right, for those of you who haven't watched The Matrix, I'm going to make a couple of references throughout my talk to a blue pill and a red pill, right? So the blue pill represents the status quo. It represents doing things that we've been doing for a long time. It represents security, safety, and comfort. But as the folks who have watched the movie know, the red pill is very much about the things that we do to challenge ourselves, to look at the world differently, to find a new way of doing things, and to figure out a way to make sure that we're allowing for other people around us to grow. So on the screen is my journey, or at least a little bit and piece of it. I was raised in a very, very small town in West Michigan. And in 2002, so some West Michigan folks. Okay, good. All right. So back in 2002, I was engaged, and I was in the process of considering whether or not I wanted to go back to work for my dad's landscaping, lawn maintenance, and snow plowing business, which my grandfather had started back in 1953. And it was a super interesting time in my life because I really wanted to escape the way that my dad managed his business. I just didn't think that my life's mission was really thoroughly aligned with the way that he ran his business. So my soon-to-be wife and I made the fateful decision to stay an additional summer and have that time working there. And I look back at that, and I was like, that was probably one of the worst decisions that I could have made, but we made it. So we go through that summer, and my soon-to-be wife and I choose September to get married. And as soon as we get married, we escape the cold winters of Michigan, and we exchanged it in late 2003 for the warmth in the summers of Arizona. And so even though she and I didn't really love each other all that much, this is how you are when you're young and naive, right? You're 21, 22. This is what happens. You marry people that you shouldn't. We make those mistakes. So, so clearly, I am not the only person making mistakes. So make as much noise as you can if you've made mistakes. Okay. Okay, so that's good. All right, so we get married in 2003, and we move out to Arizona, and everything's going pretty smoothly. But as we started our journey, as soon as we landed here is pretty much the time we started to diverge in our relationship. So I was working at the Four Seasons, she was working at the Boulders. And then one of those weekends approached us. So I want you to sit up really, really tall and firm in your chair. I want you to take a deep breath. And I want you to close your eyes for a second. And I want you to remember the best weekend of your life. I'm going to give you 15 seconds to think about it. What did you feel? What did you think? What did you hear? Who were you with? Where were you? Okay, most of you actually have your eyes closed. That's great. All right, so open your eyes. I bet you the thing that you were thinking about was actually a pretty positive event, right? So the best weekend of my life began on an early Friday morning. My wife and I were driving back from the gym, 15-minute ride back from the gym to our house, completely silent. I go into the home office, and I'm sitting there answering some emails. And all of a sudden, I hear her get out of the shower and walk down to the office. And she's standing in the doorway crying. And it's in that moment that I know my marriage is over. And it's in that moment that I realized that my savings was gone. And it's in that moment that I realized that I was going to have to begin anew. We had to short sell our house. We had to do a couple of other things. She said, you know what, I've arranged to spend this weekend with our friends. So we stood in that doorway, and I just felt a massive amount of shame pour over my body as a result of knowing that I hadn't spent the previous 5 years with her actually developing out the relationship in a meaningful way. So it's August 2008. She goes off and spends some time with her friend, and I go through the weekend realizing that I've lost all of what I had known to be true. Everything that I had lived for, swallowing the blue pill repeatedly, I realized that I had lost it. So I wake up Monday morning, and I swallow the red pill, and I drive from my house in North Phoenix down to the Thunderbird School of Global Management, where I started my MBA that Monday morning. Does my weekend sound pretty different than yours? Okay, so my pain to purpose journey, I needed that fateful weekend in 2008 to happen. I needed to figure that out, right? Because we all go through those things in a meaningful way. So we continued the journey, right, in a meaningful way, and here's a quick definition for you to consider. So thankfully, my pain to purpose journey had a series of mentors in it that really thoroughly helped me through the process. And so I'll never forget a career coach at the Thunderbird School named Pam Ellers, who gave me the DISC assessment. She gave me the career leader. She gave me the strengths finder, and she asked me a series of questions that started to help me understand how I could use the pains that I had just experienced to convert them into something that would help another person as they go through their journey. So my journey of understanding how I wanted to unlock human potential became very obvious as a result of her coaching and mentorship in the way that my dad was never able to provide that. And that's okay, right? We all have those people in our lives that shift us. So see, the secret about the pain to purpose journey is that we all go through it, but society for some reason just doesn't talk about it all that much, right? We know that social connection, and we know that the key to a long, happy, and healthy life is actually the value of the quality of our close-knit relationships. And if you don't believe this, go to TED.com, type the name Robert Waldinger into the search bar, and look for his talk. And it's a great 18-minute talk about the fact that power, money, and fame all mean this much when it comes to human happiness. Okay? What matters the most is the quality of your close-knit relationships. So I want you to be very, very cognizant of the fact that through all of the pain that you may have experienced, and each of you was very, very loud just a minute ago saying that you've made some mistakes, right? We all do it. But how do we turn those into a collective learning experience? So I'm going to share a little bit more about the lessons that I've learned through 5 things that I think that you can then utilize very tactically on a day-to-day basis, right? To really thoroughly make sure that you're using your own pain to purpose journey in a way that benefits the people that are around you, but that you're also figuring out a way to help those people around you unlock their own potential too. So I know that many of you have one-to-one discussions, whether it's in your office, whether it's over Slack, whether it's via text message, right, or whether it's around the water cooler, whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. I know you're doing it. And I also know that you have lots of opportunities to deliver the message in a one-to-many format, right, whether it's a webinar, whether it's a podcast, whether it's talking to a group or a group meeting. whether it's you giving presentations like this one to large groups, right? There's things that you can do, okay? I also want to talk a little bit about change management, right? Why is it that it seems to be right now that the only thing constant in life is change, right? Tax law changes that just happened that have basically created the longest bull market in American history, right? It's just amazing how we've had all this really significant growth happen for a very, very long time. At some point, it needs to correct, but for now, let's ride it while we can. So let's talk a little bit about change. I also want to talk about continuous learning and the value of experiential learning. I've done the rote memorization thing, but I'm a really big fan of experiential learning. We'll talk about some methodologies or tactics to make that work for you too. And then last, I'm a very big fan of thinking about what do we do from a daily habit standpoint versus worrying about some sort of goal that exists down the road. Right? It's really, really nice to set goals and to have something to kind of drive to, but what matters way more is what you're willing to do to stay committed to that on a day-to-day basis. What are you doing in the short term, okay? So, is that true? Okay, is that true? Okay, good. Who had the bullhorn earlier? Where'd that go? Is that table 5 right here? Blow that thing. Thank you. Okay, good. So the reason why I bring up this idea of employee engagement, right, is that what are we doing in those one-to-one dialogues? What's really important is that we're figuring out a way to engage people at a deep level. So if we're going to swallow the blue pill, right, what ends up happening is that we avoid our colleagues, right? We find ways to not talk to them, or we only do employee engagement surveys annually. Right? We're not finding ways to have dialogue or deeper discussion with people about what's actually going on in their department. So what I want to do is think about how do we at that really, really deep level actually give a shit about the people around us in a very, very deep way. So there's a couple things up on the screen that I think are going to help you. And I use this when I am coaching executives. I get to travel the nation quite a bit and help people one-to-one to try to figure out how to do what Peter was talking about earlier. Why is it that in Gallup statistics, only 33% of the American workforce is actively engaged, right? Unemployment as of last month was 3.8% as per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There are 155,475,000 people in the workplace right now. Okay, that's a fascinating statistic. We are very, very low unemployment, very, very large work base, but very few people, except for the folks in organizations in this room, they're not happy. And that number Peter referenced, I think Kevin referenced earlier, the 33%, according to Gallup, globally, the number is 13%. Only 13% of the global workforce is actually happy in their work. Okay, so I'm glad that there are top companies to work for in Arizona that help to celebrate the many things that you guys are doing. So when I work with folks one-to-one, what I want to get them to do is the stuff that you see on the screen. I want to get them to swallow the red pill in a meaningful way and start to think about how do we figure out what it is that our employees, what do they want in terms of communication? You're not going to believe this, but I'm the biggest introvert on the planet. Right? If you know the DISC, I'm a high C, and if you know Myers-Briggs, I'm ISTJ. Right? ISTJ too? Thank you. Okay, good. On the Strengths Finder, my number 1 is relator. Right? I just love getting deep with people. Right, but I feel it's my life's work to make sure that I can share this message with as many people as I possibly can, okay? So I get into conversations where we can talk about these things at a very, very deep level and a very meaningful level. I love the bottom one on the far left. How do people prefer to receive appreciation? I don't think we do a good enough job in our society about appreciating people. So there's a great website, languagesofappreciation.com. There's one of 5. What is the person that you're communicating to? How do they prefer to receive appreciation? Figure that out and find a way to deliver to them. For transparency's sake, I'm a words of affirmation guy. So if you say thank you or I love you or something like that to me, I'm putty in your hands, right? But everybody's different. My dad happens to be a gifts guy. He likes to receive gifts. So when I travel, send him a small gift. That's how he wants to receive the message. So think very specifically about those people on your team and your colleagues. How do they want to receive the message in a way that really motivates and engages them? And if you have additional questions about this, please reach out to me. I'll put my contact information up at the end. But we want to figure these things out. We want to make sure that the people on your team have a best friend at work. We want to make sure that you understand their pain to purpose journey and understand their mission in a way that you can connect their day-to-day behavior to your organization's mission, right? Because as Simon Sinek talked about, we have to start with why. We can't start with how and what, that stuff's bullshit. We got to start with why in a very, very meaningful way. Okay? So when you're communicating one-to-one, the way that you can pull out the pain to purpose journey for somebody and deeply engage them is to ask them these questions. And the way that you're going to do that is you're going to go talk to all of your direct reports. You're going to set up a 60-minute discussion. You're going to give it to them ahead of time. And you're going to say, okay, for the next couple of weeks, I want you to think about these things. I want you to write these things down. Okay? And when you go in and you have that 60-minute discussion, set the expectation that you're just going to be completely vulnerable. And if you do that, the game is going to completely change. Because as we know, organizations, right, people tend to leave organizations for pay, compensation, benefits. Brian Stinson and I were talking about this a couple days ago. They do that, but they also leave it more for the organization's culture and for their manager or the management. So how do we work on building those two things? Because pay, compensation, and benefits are becoming less important, but the relationship with the manager and or the company's culture matters way more. Okay, let's look at number 2. So when we think about the one-to-many journey, what are we doing to make sure that in a one-to-many scenario, we're engaging people? So I oftentimes want to tackle, at its core, the person's fears. Now, there are 4 buckets of fear. Number 1, a person fears being vulnerable. Number 2, they fear not being liked. Number 3, they fear loss of security, especially long-term. Or number 4, they fear that their work product is going to be criticized. So if you know that every single person in this room is fearful of something, how do you take that fear straight off the plate so that they have the confidence to do whatever it is that they need? So your job as a leader is to make sure that, because you're at the center there in the orange, right? Your job as a leader is to make sure that you do that for your direct reports, but then you also create the right environment for people to then share those things amongst themselves, right? Stephen M. R. Covey wrote a great book called The Speed of Trust, right? That's a great book. There's some other good texts that you can fall back on that can help with this in a meaningful way. So in a one-to-many setting, we need to develop some trust. Maybe you've read Patrick Lencioni's book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Raise your hand if you have. Okay, a fair amount of you have. If not, check a summary out or go buy it online. It'll help you to understand that the core of every dysfunctional team is a lack of trust. And if you want to build trust, you have to help people confront their own fears, be vulnerable enough to talk about it, get all those issues out on the table in a meaningful way. That's what's going to drive employee engagement. So I've already shared with you a little bit about trying to figure out how to draw the connection between an organization's mission and the person's mission. So if you're really interested, on my website, there's in the top right-hand corner, there's a link to podcasts. And if you listen to episode 3, it is the process that I utilize when I'm coaching an executive to pull out his or her pain to purpose journey. So if you want to, just listen to it, and maybe it'll give you just a little bit of an insight to help you understand what is that thing that is unique to that person. Because as I've shared with you, the thing that I struggled with was that working for my father's business, he's a very, very good man. I love him dearly. But he has a very distinct management style. And he wasn't able to customize and tailor his style to the people on his team. And because of that, he's had a relatively high amount of turnover, including me, right? Which I think bothers. But I do have a younger sister. She'll take over the business. It's going to continue on in a meaningful way, right? So we do have that. So if you want to know what your colleagues' pain to purpose journey is, maybe take a listen to that podcast, figure out what their mission is, and figure out how you can connect it to the organization's mission. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with this. I think they don't know how to draw that line of saying, here's the wildly important goal, here's what we're trying to go to, and here's how we're going to make it happen, right? We need to incent them deeply in that why, in that way. So let's talk for a second about change management. So I'm a big fan of continually thinking about what do we need to do to change and level up in our lives. There's a couple of things here that are important for me. I read a quote just the other day that was really important, and it was this idea that if there's a flower and it is not blossoming, you do not attempt to fix the flower. You fix the environment in which the flower is growing. Okay, that same metaphor applies to each of us. right? We're in this environment where we have to think about, as leaders, what are we doing to thoroughly engage our people and treating them as though they're flowers. We can't try to fix them specifically. We can think about what's the environment we create around them to allow them to blossom. What's the fertilizer that they need? What's the water that they need? Think about that in a very, very basic sense. But as a person starts to ascend and grow, what happens is that a person who has a lesser level of understanding, they're going to try to pull them back down. So when a person gets to level 3, level 4, level 5, but somebody that's at level 1 or 2 is going to ask them, is going to try to pull them back to where they're at because of their own insecurities. It's your job as a leader through the change management process to make sure that doesn't happen. I'm also a very, very big fan of Kotter's 8-step model of change when it comes to facilitating procedural or organizational adjustment. Kotter's 8-step is one of the best methods possible. So he published a book about 20 years ago. More recently, in 2014, it was updated. If your organization happens to be struggling with change, please take a look at the text called Accelerate or some of the other books associated with that. What is really important is that what we found is that, or McKinsey had found, big global consulting company, they found that when an organization sets stated objectives for its change initiatives, guess what % of the time they fail? Anybody? Yell it out. Somebody said 80, 85, 90, a lot. That's a good answer too. So the answer is that when an organization sets a stated objective, they fail to meet it 70% of the time. And that's because there's lack of communication, there's lack of executive sponsorship, there's lack of a clear line between the employee and what he or she has to do at the front line to how that's going to impact the top line. So if you don't have some sort of direct connection between the two, there is definitely something that needs to be adjusted or fixed. So when we think about change, we can look at it from the standpoint of we can help a person grow and climb to a different level of their being, but we also need to think about what's the environment that we're creating purposely to make sure that they're connected, that we're creating the right environment for those changes to happen. So I'm just a really big fan of opening communication in that way, because I don't think that we oftentimes do a good enough job because we're not having the discussion around our fear. So what Kotter was suggesting is that, on the left-hand side in the gray, everybody knows the org structure, right? The org chart. Everybody knows that. But what they found in some of their more recent research is that the only way that we can adjust to change appropriately is if we also have volunteer-based networks of people that are working in conjunction with the organizational hierarchy. So I know all of you do have the hierarchy, and that's great, but are you also setting things up for success by organizing a more on-the-spot or ad hoc network? So a blue pill, right, in this is that the hierarchy people are going to say, let's go take the current great performers. Let's go find those people who are already having success, and let's let them lead that change. And I don't want you to do that, right? They're already doing too many things. They don't need more. What I want you to do is swallow the red pill, and I want you to think very, very strongly about identifying people vertically and horizontally across your organization and figure out who is actually really interested in working on that problem, right? Who is really interested in figuring out a way to solve that problem? People tend to fall in love with ideas, but they don't fall in love with how they're going to solve a problem. We want to find people that are engaged in that way. So find a way to swallow the red pill and ask across your organization, where are those people? Who is it that's going to be the most heavily invested to want to be able to get this work done? So if you can figure out how to take your traditional hierarchy, but pair it with something that kind of formulates organically, but is based on some volunteer work, and they're not the usual suspects, right? They're these other people inside of our business that we wouldn't normally rely on. That's where the power is. Because if we can celebrate wins, if we can figure out a way to allow for them to really thoroughly grow something. Has anybody heard of Google X? No, okay. So, okay, there's one here. So again, another great TED Talk by a guy named Astro Teller, who's the leader of Google X, which is their kind of innovation arm, if you will. When they make mistakes that cost millions of dollars, do you know what they do? They throw massive parties, right? My guess is that your organizations aren't doing that. And that's okay if it's not, right? That's fine. But what I want you to think about is that when mistakes are made, taking the red pill means is that you make those mistakes made a collective learning experience. You don't just allow for them to sit off to the side. They have to become a collective learning experience. And Google X and what Astro talks about in that TED Talk is a great way for you to wrap your mind around that. So when it comes to the pain to purpose journey, let's take those traditional hierarchies that are very reliable and efficient, but let's figure out a way to get some of those people that might be just a little bit more behind the scenes to create those networks that will allow for them to advance initiatives within your organization quickly. My guess is that you know many of those pictures on that screen. Okay, I'm a big fan of continuous learning. We just talked about that a second ago. What we have to remember in that in our society is so competitive, we have so much access to information, we're constantly interrupted with things, but we have to keep learning. We just don't have a choice. If you think about J.K. Rowling over on the far right-hand side of your screen, right? She lived off Britain's welfare system for a number of years before she was able to write the Harry Potter book and become a billionaire. Or you think about Nelson Mandela, 27 years in prison before being allowed to exit, and then he became the president of South Africa from 1994 to 1999. Or even on the far left, Oprah. I don't think that many people remember that Oprah was raised by a teenage mother in Mississippi. She ended up going to Milwaukee for something. She got pregnant at age 14, had a child. The child died very, very early on in infancy. But somehow or another, through that pain to purpose journey for herself, she became the richest African American of the 20th century. Okay? So it's just this reminder that when we're thinking about growing and developing, we can't worry too much about our past. We can't allow the past to dictate and control our future. Right? We have to be willing to confront fears. We have to be willing to surround ourselves with the right people that are going to allow us to prosper and grow, and I think that they've done that. I'm a big fan of you looking at and saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And if one of those 5 is a loser, guess what? You got to drop them and you got to put one winner friend in that circle. So if I think everybody is now looking around the people at their table. And they're like, which one of the people at my table can I drop? Or who can I add as the winner friend? Do not say that directly to their face. Okay. Okay, but it's important that you remember that. Okay, so if out of everything we talk about today, if you drop one loser friend and you gain one winner friend, I will be happy. Right? Because then you're going to level up in a meaningful way. So I'm a big fan of when we think of learning, I don't just think of learning as rote memorization, right? I've already told you that I'm not a big fan of it. And even though I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own money on it, right? MBAs and certificates and all that. See, swallowing the red pill when we're thinking about learning isn't just purely offering our organizations a small tuition reimbursement for a small segment of our employee base, right? It's carving out dollars for formalized mentorship programs that allow for us to show how their work is directly connected to a wildly important goal. It's making sure that there are dollars available for experiential learning to get a certificate or a stackable credential or some sort of an apprenticeship, something that isn't traditional university learning. Okay, so for me, when I look at a client and I'm trying to assess their success, what we're really looking for, what I care about most, is are they learning to become 1% better than themselves from the previous day? That's all I care about. Right? Are they one step closer, 1% closer to living their life's mission as a result of investing that time in themselves? Are they taking that 30 minutes or so for themselves to say, this is how I'm going to grow and I'm going to develop? Okay, let's talk a little bit about, as we wrap up here, a little bit about process. Okay, we've already shared a little bit, right? Process focus is important. It's nice to set goals. And I was talking to Stacy here earlier just a second ago about it's nice to set goals, but what really matters in moving the needle is the person willing to make short-term sacrifices daily in order to make that longer goal happen? And I think we get really emotionally connected to the longer-term goal as opposed to saying, what's the short-term thing that I'm willing to let go of in order to make the longer thing happen organically? So has anybody heard or read the 5-second rule by Mel Robbins? If so, make some noise. So Not enough. Okay, holy cow. All right. So melrobbins.com. I was on stage with Mel 2 weeks ago in Houston, and I was really inspired by her. So please check out melrobbins.com when you can. She wrote a book called The 5-Second Rule. And she was very, very frank in talking about her pain to purpose journey and how what drove her success was the fact that when she was not feeling great, when she was feeling down, she would count 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and she would take action. Whatever it was, it didn't matter. So when you're confronted by that wildly irrational brain that you have, if you haven't read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast or Slow, or if you haven't read Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, or Antonio Damasio wrote a book called The Descartes Error. Basically, all three of those books talk about how 95% of human decisions are irrational, right? They're your feelings. Only 5% of our decisions are actually fact-based, rational decisions. In order to overcome that irrational mind, you have to practice the 5-second rule in order to advance and move yourself forward in that way. So what we can do is know that people are struggling with something, know that they're fearing something, and we can't just say we're only going to reward you at the very end of the goal being achieved. Instead, what we say is we're going to find a way to celebrate you weekly, right? Because we know that millennials are a very, very big hot topic, right? Those folks born between 1980 and 2000, very, very big thing. But through the research that I have done, I've also found out that there are some studies that show that they are the most anxious and nervous generation on history. Okay, so when we ask you as leaders to give them a little bit of extra kudos or praise, it's not because they're lazy or entitled or selfish. Those things are not true. They're deeply filled with anxiety. And you've got to figure out a way to help them get past that if you want to engage them in a deep and meaningful way. So figure that piece out. And the way that you're going to do that is to swallow the red pill and make sure that you're staying focused on process. Weekly, in one-to-one discussion or one-to-many team meetings or some sort of team award, what you're going to do is you're going to stay focused in on celebrating those wins. That's process focus. So as a close here, a real quick story. About a month ago now, I went to the Berkshire Hathaway Shareholders Conference. Has anybody ever been? Am I the only person in the room that's been? You guys really don't have to go. But it's cool, but it's not that cool. There are 38,000 people inside the CenturyLink Arena in Omaha. So I go with one of my clients. I wanted to support him. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm listening to Charlie and Warren kind of tell their story and talk about the money that the organization's making. And you could just see there are fans in the room of what they're doing, and that's fantastic. But what I struggled with was realizing that there was more than $1 trillion of net worth in that room that day. So as fate would have it, the next morning, I wake up, and I go down to a small little park in Omaha, and I see that there's this bridge that goes over a train track, and I'm like, wow, that looks kind of interesting, and it was kind of overlooking the banks of the Missouri River. So I'm walking over it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, okay, so I'm going to do this, and I wanted to watch the sunrise. So I just stand there on this platform. There's a train that's kind of going behind me, sunrise giving me tons of energy, and then all of a sudden I hear a little bustle right in the bush down to my right. And I look down, and there are 4 homeless people. And I'm just overcome with shame and sadness, so I start crying. And I'm looking at them, and I'm like, I'm really filled with shame right now, not because there's only a tattered tarp that's keeping the elements away from them, or that I was in a room the day before where there was $1 trillion of net worth and these folks, barely have clothes on their back. But what I realized is that I was being washed over with shame by the fact that I had been duped, hoodwinked, and bamboozled the same way that I was when I was standing in the doorway of my office as my wife was leaving me. See, the shame that I felt wasn't so much this being anger or being frustrated with society as it had stood, but what I realized was that for 28 years, I had been swallowing the blue pill. And so I was so frustrated that I need to find more ways to swallow the red pill. And so I stand before you today, right, to ask for your forgiveness, right, that I didn't swallow the red pill sooner. I didn't do more to share the pain to purpose journey with other people to help them through the things that they needed, right? But I also ask for you to really consider how can you Be the person you needed when you were younger. How can you dive deep to understand what your pain to purpose journey is? How do you help other people overcome it in that exact same way? Because what I've found in all of my work with executives around the nation, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of if they have a jet or not, right, is that they want and they need to be the person they needed when they were younger. They were missing something when they were younger that they needed help with. And I just believe that it's each of our work to make sure that happens. So as I finish, I want to encourage each of you to just do a couple of small things, right? Take the time to understand your pain to purpose journey, listen to the podcast, think about this, engage your people, listen in a more deep and meaningful way. But what I think is also important is that if you can do this one thing, which is every single week for the rest of this year, you can go to one colleague on your team and you can ask them one question about their pain to purpose journey. And if you do that, right, I will feel a lot of that shame just kind of wash away because I know I could have done more and I didn't. And I don't want you to have to suffer that same discipline of regret that I do. Be the person you needed when you were younger. Thank you guys for listening today. Enjoy your morning.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Equal Chance to Be Unequal. I'm Michael S. Seaver. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes and like, share, or comment on this podcast on michaelsseaver.com, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. Go forth and be awesome.